Hello everyone and welcome to a really wonderful game from the semifinals of the FIDE Grand Prix. It's Amin Tabatabaei versus Wesley and it's a game that really shows you how one move makes all the difference. It's a weird thing to say in chess because of course it's a game, where each player makes a move, so of course one move will make a difference, but here it's hard to emphasize how much of a difference it makes, but you'll see what I mean by this. It's really an enjoyable one. Now let's dive straight into it. So Amin opens with d4. We have knight to f6, and before we continue, it's important to mention that Wesley won his game with the white pieces. So this is the return game, the second game of their match, and now Amin needs to win in order to force rapid tie breaks. So that being said, let's continue. We have c4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. Wesley goes for the Nimzo-Indian defense, knight to f3, and now Wesley castles. And here we have a3. We said that this was sort of an older way to do this, where you actually allow black to double your pawns here after capturing the knight. But lately, everyone's been playing this instead of the queen c2 line, and it's been going very well for white. So why not? Bishop captures on c3, b captures, and now c5, offering white to triple his pawns. But of course, we are not interested in that. Here, Amin just continues developing. We have pawn to g3, preparing to fianchet to the light square bishop. And Wesley does the same. He wants to counter white's strong light square bishop on this diagonal. So here, bishop g2, bishop to b7, and now d5, and it is now already, as of move 9, that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Wesley deals with this. He pushes d6, leaving the option of advancing the pawn to e5 at any moment. And here we have castles. We have queen to e7. And here you could go e4 right away, but Amin goes knight to h4. He's saying that if you ever capture on d5 or push this pawn to e5, you are losing control over the f5 square, and then I'm going to put my knight on f5. So Wesley says, all right, I'm not going to do that. Knight b to d7. Wesley continues development, and rook to e1, preparing for that e4 push, and now comes knight to e5, and this is now a beautiful square for the knight, because if you don't push f4, it's very unlikely that you are getting rid of it, and well, maybe f4 would be a bit too aggressive. Of course, you would enjoy having this pawn chain, but opening up your king like this might be a bit too soon for this. So here, your c4 pawn is the attacked, and how do you defend it? The problem is you could only defend it with a move like queen to b3, but what is your queen doing on b3? It's really a silly square for the queen, and there's really nothing to do on the queen side. So here we have e4, sacrificing the c4 pawn, knight captures on c4, and now bishop back to f1. So you see that black's plan was successful here. Wesley was able to first create a double c pawn and then attack one of them, as they are very easy targets, but this was maybe white's plan all along. So bishop to f1, and now knight to e5. Interestingly, if Wesley did not only need a draw here, maybe he would go for b5 here and go for a very sharp game. But as he only needs a draw, I imagine that's why he went back, knight to e5, and now c4. Now we don't have a double c pawn, and by giving up this one pawn, we've opened up this diagonal for our light square bishop. So this is a well, I don't see who wouldn't go for this now when you actually see what's happening. When the pawn was on c3, it's very hard to develop your light square bishop. Here, after the pawn is gone, you get this diagonal, and everyone would give up this pawn. So here, knight g6, offering a trade of knights, and knight back to g2. And now, only now, we have b5. Yes, the b5 pawn is undefended, but you are weakening white's d5 pawn, and that's all that matters. So here, c captures on b5. Wesley now trades, e captures on d5, and e captures on d5. And you can't go for the d5 pawn yet because your queen is hanging. So queen d7 by Wesley, and now knight to e3. We are keeping an eye on that d5 pawn. Rook f to e8. This is played with an idea of actually winning the d5 pawn, as you'll see. So bishop to b2. Finally, we grab hold of this long diagonal, and now knight captures on d5. Looks very scary because, well, white is defending the d5 square twice, but not really, because rook captures on e1. It was the plan all along. So knight captures on d5, and now we play rook captures on e1. And this is the moment where things get extremely interesting, and I will just show you one line. that doesn't work, but it's very important for the continuation of the game. Here you could choose to capture on e1, but you could also choose to maybe play knight to f6 check first, because you know that after queen captures rook, black will pick up the knight on d5. So why not mess up the black's pawn structure by playing knight to f6 first? The reason is, after knight to f6 check, of course black will capture as there's a royal fork happening. Queen captures on e1, now knight to h4 is just winning for Wesley. That's the problem. The queen on e1 is in a terrible spot. Knight to f3 check is the threat of a royal fork, and there just isn't a good move. Of course, you can't capture the knight because queen g4 check, and that's it. You're getting checkmated. Bishop g2, this will be checkmate. So what you could do is maybe play queen e3 at avoid the scary fork, but still knight f3 check, king h1, and now all of the nasty discoveries are possible. You can even bring a rook into the game to improve your position further, and this will be completely unplayable. Black is completely winning here. So having that in mind, we go into the line that actually works for black, and that is, or rather for white, queen captures on e1, and bishop captures on d5. So as we've discussed, and now comes rook to d1. It's always this miraculous rook a to d1 move that brings so much to the game. Always, you know, Anderson's immortal game comes to mind, or rather his evergreen game whenever rook a to d1 was played. But here it's completely different, but it brings so much to the game. So what is the rook actually doing on d1? Okay, it's attacking the bishop, but more importantly, it's actually preventing Wesley from going for the forced line that we've just discussed, from going knight to h4. Here you could play bishop back to e6, you could play queen to e6 to guard the bishop, but Wesley actually goes for knight to h4, and it seems like it should be working, or rather that Wesley can force a draw. And because Wesley won the first game, drawing the second one means that he wins the semi-final match. The problem is there is one move here that prevents Wesley from not just drawing the game, but also from escaping with his head intact. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the only move that wins the game for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook to d3. That's the good stuff. And before we continue, we first have to ask ourselves what happens if rook captures on d5 and what happens if g captures on h4. Because we already showed the line previously, we know that this doesn't work due to queen g4 check, and after bishop blocks you get checkmated. But what about rook captures on d5? Well, again, just knight f3 check, and there's a royal fork happening. King h1, knight captures, we lose the queen. The problem for black is here, or rather for Wesley, after rook to d3, there just isn't a move black can play, because now with the f3 square covered, that's a pretty big deal. Now if knight to f3 check, okay, you might think it's a royal fork, so I might not win a queen, but he will have to give up the rook. The problem is, after rook captures on f3 and bishop captures, we have this queen c3 attacking the bishop and threatening checkmate, and there's just no way out of this. Okay, you could play queen g4, now you guard the the g7 square and the bishop here, but now comes the mighty h3 pawn, and black can just resign here. You have to move the queen. You can't keep an eye on the bishop and on the g7 square, so it's better to defend against checkmate. Now we just pick up the bishop, and now of course white is completely winning. There's no way, there's just no way out of this. So what else could you play after this rook to d3 move? So knight to f3 doesn't work. Could we maybe just move the bishop back? Why shouldn't this be possible? We already know that the pawn cannot capture the knight because of this check. Well, now even that changed with the rook coming to d3. Now after the knight is captured, queen g4 check, we can block rook g3, and not only do you save yourself from getting checkmated, you are also just winning the game on the spot after the queen moves. So not available for Wesley. And now that you see what happens after rook to d3, now all of a sudden both the bishop and the knight are hanging. So what can Wesley play? Queen g4. That's a brilliant resource by Wesley. So he, of course, finds the absolute best way to continue. Now the point is, okay, well, what happens if we capture the bishop? Well, then, of course, knight to f3 will win the game for black. But what can we play here? Bishop to e2. Here attacking the queen, and where can the queen go? well, that's one way to do it, but we don't we don't want to do it. First, we play queen to c3. We threaten the g7 pawn, and still knight is hanging, bishop is hanging, and the queen has to keep an eye on the g7 square. And now if you go knight to f3, and it seems like it should be working, still just rook captures, bishop captures, and now again the mighty h3 move forces the queen away either from the defense of the bishop or the g7 square. So after queen to c3, Wesley says, all right, bishop to e4, and now it seems that Wesley saved both the knight and the bishop. The problem is the resulting endgame is just lost for him, because now bishop to e2, and of course bishop cannot be captured as checkmate is still being threatened. So queen g5, we have to keep an eye on g7, and now rook captures on d6. And now white's position is just winning, even though the material is completely even. Knight to f5, Wesley brings the knight back into the game with tempo, the rook is attacked. Queen e5 now, pinning the knight cannot move. We have queen to e7 offering a queen trade, and Wesley offers a queen trade, and Amin happily trades. We have queen captures, knight captures, and here pawn to a4, and it was in this position on move 30 that Wesley so resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. It seems like there should be, because the material is completely equal, but if you look at it more closely, white has two pawns on the queen side, black only has one. So you know that white is creating a pass pawn very, very soon. Another thing is there's no way for black to actually activate the rook with white controlling this d8 square. So it's a beautiful open d file. The rook might come to d7. You might put more pressure on the position. Bishop is coming to c4. You have a bishop here controlling this diagonal. It's a fully open board with Amin having the bishop pair. But I know you guys really enjoyed when I sort of finished game. So let's see what happens if, let's say, rook to e8. Okay, you could claim the other open file. Now bishop c4. And now after, let's say, bishop to f5, you want to guard against rook to d7. Now we push a5. We want to create a pass pawn, and after creating some breathing room for the black king, now we play f3. We're going to play knight to g6. Now the rook is controlling the open e file, but now just b6. And after captures and captures, there's just no way of actually stopping the pawn. You could play rook to b8, but still just bishop to a6. Now we're getting our pawn to b7. After something like king f8, you want to get your king into the game. B7 is played, and black is really without moves. If you try king to e7 or something like that, we can even play something like rook captures and g6, and after bishop captures, bishop to e5, and that's it. Black can no longer drag this on. So of course Wesley knows this, and after this a4 he resigns without pushing this any further. And incredibly he completely dominated the game in the previous game where he had the white pieces, but here after this rook to d1, the knight to h4 idea simply doesn't work. And here probably Wesley just wanted to draw this. He already won the first game, and it means that he gets to the finals of the Grand Prix, which means that he reached the pinnacle of the tournament, but knight to h4 just doesn't work after rook 8 to d1, and it's a dangerous mindset always to be having. I don't know if Wesley was playing this because he really wanted to force a draw. Probably, I don't know, it's hard to say, but of course if you spot this, then you look for some other moves, and then you find moves like just moving the bishop or moving the queen. But here, incredible how the inclusion of rook 8 to d1 prevents all of these threats that were possible while the d file was unoccupied by any of white's rooks. Brilliant stuff by Amin, who successfully forces a tiebreak. We'll see what happens in the tiebreak. So hope you guys really enjoyed this, and hope that you were able to solve this rook to d3 mystery, as it's one of the nicer ones that we've had in a while. I would like to thank Pascal Poirer, Mladen Đurić, Adam Tomček, Showtime, and Irovek for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE Grand Prix until it ends. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.